Networking and marketing made simple is for you, the business owner who has a product, a service, or a message that you believe in. My name is Scott Aaron, and each week we'll take a behind-the-scenes look into the real-world marketing and networking tactics and strategies for getting what you have in front of you to a lot more people. Thanks for spending time with me, and now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Networking and Marketing Made Simple. Super excited about today's episode, as I know all of you are, with the Thursday episodes being interview episodes. And one of the things that I love most about this podcast that I've had for now going into the 5th year is all of the incredible people that I meet, all the interesting stories that all of you end up hearing. You know, there's been over 200 interviews now. And it's one of those things where it really provides context and information for all of you that entrepreneurship business is not a straight line. There are twists and turns, there's ups and downs, and there's things that we need to go through. So who I have for you today, he spent over 2 decades as a designer in the web and then moved into the product design aspect of business. But most recently, has kind of set that aside to really focus on growing his podcast, which I had the ability and fortunate luck to be a guest on, which I will hyperlink that in the description as well, so you can listen to that episode. So without further ado, and with all that behind us, Hiromi, welcome to today's episode.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So, you know, you've taken an interesting journey. Obviously, going back to your, the last 20 years, spending it in design, starting in web design and then moving into product design. And now most recently kind of venturing into, the podcast production and having your own podcast, which I love how you do it. It's more storytelling, which I love the format of how you do it. But what would you say in that transition of going from being a designer to then transitioning into having your own podcast and that being your business now? What was the catalytic moment for you where you said, you know what, I'm going to hang up my design hat and I'm going to put on my podcast hat and I'm going to go all in with this?
It's a good question. Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day because it's been about a year now that I've been working with a marketing agency to produce their podcast. And, I remember when I took the job, my father-in-law was worried, he's like, are you sure you want to take such a drastic career change this late in life? But, the reality is that's what I appreciate about your story, Scott, is that, you talked about the differences and similarities between owning a gym, for example, and then now being in marketing yourself. Such a drastic shift in, to most people, but you realize that once you have a certain mindset, the differences of what you do is not as important as how you do it. Right? And would you say that's been the case for you?
Yeah, I there's a lot of similarities, and I always talk about all the lessons and the things that I learned being in the wellness industry as a gym owner, trainer, and nutritionist for almost 18 years. I learned structure, I learned repetition, and I learned routine, which if you take those 3 things and you throw in consistency there, that is the secret sauce to being successful in business in general. So no matter what you're doing, there has to be structure to it. There has to be consistency. There has to be routine. There has to be repetition. So to your point, when people hear about what someone is doing now, based on where they came from, they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How does that even work?
Right.
Well, when you kind of pull apart the lessons and the infrastructure of what one did, and again, just like you said, yes, you spent, 20 years in web design and product design. You're using that same skill set to produce podcasts now, which again, there still needs to be an eye for design. There still needs to be a lot of the things that you've learned in the 2 decade plus career in design that you're now just applying in a different way.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly right. This company that I'm working with right now, UVS, they're a marketing company, B2B marketing company, and they had approached me based on a podcast I had done on the side years ago about UX design, and they liked the approach, and they wanted to include podcasting as an offering within their account-based marketing efforts. And so, really, the more I thought about it, what do you do when you produce a digital product? You meet with the stakeholders, you decide what are their business goals, and then you analyze their current processes and you try to improve on that process, and then figure out, like, how can I really manipulate is the wrong way, but encourage certain behaviors in users that will lead to that desired result. And so with a podcast product, it's really the same thing. How can I, and you're a master of this, right, Scott? Ask the right questions to get a good story out of someone, whether they're willing to maybe offer that story up front or not. And so developing that process has been really exciting for me to work through. How do you get to that end result? Have you found crossover in your doing this podcast and then also your marketing efforts?
Well, I think that, what people forget is that when you are looking to grow any business, whether it's brick and mortar or online, you're looking for means and channels of ways to connect and further your audience growth. Now, that could be through an email list, it can be through listeners of a podcast, it could be through the growth of a social media channel that you're spending time on. And again, podcasting is one of those things that can be a catalyst for multiple other things where you can have offerings. And that's the great thing. I just started a subscription membership to my podcast. So the hosting platform that I use, because of the growth of my podcast, they said, you've unlocked this opportunity to monetize it even further and offer a, very low, it's $2.99 a month. And it could allow my listeners to unlock a weekly bonus episode, which is every Friday. So you build that rapport, you build that trust with the audience, and then again, it can unlock other things. So I believe that there's catalytic things for everything that we do. Just like with your podcast that you were doing on the side, it led to this opportunity, where you were teaching UX, and now there's this company saying, I love what Hiromi is teaching. This could be an added benefit for what we're doing. Let's talk to this guy and see if we can bring him in to help us with, offering a podcast for what we're doing. So there's definitely a purpose, but cause and effect. If you're going to put something out there, there's going to be a positive effect from it. If it's value based, if it's educational, information based, where it lands in the right ears and on the right eyes of, a potential end consumer or client, so to speak, there's a lot of opportunities that end up presenting themselves there. And again, I think you're a prime example of that with, the podcast that you were doing on the side, which has landing you, to where you are right now.
Yeah. I think that's key, Scott. And I appreciate what you said there, is being open to new opportunities and new experiences. When I was younger, I'm talking like a preteen, teen, I was very into visual arts, and that was all that defined me. And I think that's healthy. As young people, we look to find that solid ground, that foundation of our lives, by defining differences in things. I am an artist, you are a engineer or whatever. Maybe you said you have kids right now too, right? And you're probably teaching them things like, what's your favorite color and what kind of food do you like, those kind of very Boolean yes no type black and white things. It's a healthy thing to come to terms with, right?
Yeah,
at those early ages.
you ask questions to get answers, and you find out what they like and what they don't like, and what they do like. You kind of like lean into that and say, how much do you like this?
Right.
My son is into multiple things. He loves music, listening and playing music. He plays multiple instruments. He loves sports. He hasn't honed in on just one. He plays baseball, he wrestles, he plays soccer, and then also he loves gaming, and he
Yeah.
kind of he floats between, and it's interesting just about generational, you know, growing up. I'll be 44 in April. I grew up with I would say the dawn of technology, meaning, Nintendo was, I was playing Atari and Nintendo growing up. And, for my parents, that was really of no interest to them because they didn't grow up with technology, but I did. So,
Mm-hmm.
where myself and my father, we bonded over, sports, we bonded over, general family things, because that's what we had growing up in the 80s and 90s. Now, my son being 10 years old, I grew up with different things that he's now growing up with. So, my dad didn't play video games with me. Now, I will say that we did have two big arcade games, like, the life-size ones. We had Space Invaders and Miss Pac-Man, which, again, those were games that my dad was familiar with because they had arcades back in the day. So
Yeah.
he would play those. He would never really play Nintendo. But fast forward to, 2023, and, my wife and Taylor play like this, almost like, I don't even know, just shooter game. And then
Yeah.
him and I love sports games, so him and I play FIFA. So it's really cool to see the evolution, not only of what interests kids nowadays,
Right.
but the relationships of some of the interests that you have when you grow up, and how that kind of bleeds into the relationships, as you said, with the kids, finding out what they like, what they don't like. And, he's got a very diverse, I would say, palate.
Yeah.
He eats sashimi. He loves poke bowls.
Oh,
He
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I didn't. Again, sushi was becoming a thing when I was growing up, like in
Yeah.
1991, 1992. And, we started just like any other person that's just trying to see if you like sushi. We had the California roll, the Philly roll, right?
Sure.
Because, my parents said there's cottage cheese in it, Scott, so you might like that. So, but now, like, he's having all the, crazy rolls and eating sashimi, and it's really cool to see the evolution, not only of relationships that people have in business, but the relationships that we have in our personal lives, family and friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as we grow older, some of those, and it sounds like your son is way more diverse than most kids, but you start to bridge out from everything red is great, or everything blue is great, or country music sucks, and rap is great, or whatever. You start to blur those lines. It's healthy as an adult to start to see, oh, not all country music sucks, or not all, you start to diversify. And really what I think that is finding similarities and not just differences, right? You say that's a truck, that's a road. You need to understand the difference. But in the end, what makes both of them work is not what makes them different, but what makes them similar. It's the similar plane on the tread of the tires and the similar structure of the road that allows our infrastructure to work. And so that's what I appreciate about this, what we're doing, Scott, in our podcast efforts, talking to people of a lot of different backgrounds and understanding, really, like, wow, we have, you owned a fitness institution. What is that like, and how is that similar to my experience? And you start to realize, oh no, we have a shared human experience. I think that's fascinating.
Well, my big thing is, what do you feel like with everything that you were doing in, web design, product design? Because, again, if you think about it, you started kind of like really behind the scenes. Web design is like really, really back end stuff. And then you get into product design, which is more of, I would say, the front end type of stuff, which is the product, the good or the service that the end user is buying. And now you've gone into, podcast design, which, is even a more intimate experience, because not only it's the back end stuff, the front end stuff, but it's also the digital aspect of things, where it's the listener base. Emily Goff, who is a podcast coach and a friend of mine, she said that podcasting is one of the most intimate experiences that someone can have, because literally you're talking right into someone's ears, you're talking right into their head. It's an immersive experience. So with the web design and the product design background, what do you feel you learned in doing those things that allowed you to carry over into podcast design and podcast production and everything you're doing for the podcast, that enabled you to really, really shine in doing everything that you're doing now?
Well, that's a great observation about intimacy. First of all, I've heard multiple pieces of feedback from your story in particular that aired last week, that it made people feel teary, because it was such an intimate story that you shared with us. What similarities are there? I guess, in the early stages of web development, you and I both came up during maybe that .com boom era, where it was really not that strategic. It was about just like, how can we do the weirdest, most eye-catching thing and then get the most eyeballs on it, with HTML tables. But eventually it did take a strategic bent, which was, with the materials we have on hand, how can we accomplish XYZ? And really that's the same thing with a podcast. What's really helped me in both those endeavors is being organized and really analyzing what is it that works about this particular design, this product, this process, being able to map those things out into maybe, a mind map, and then finding ways to improve that process and make it replicatable. Because of course, if we think back to like the production days of pre-Henry Ford, a vehicle was very unaffordable to the common person, and it was not very practical because nothing was standardized. It was every time they were deciding, should we power this thing on steam or peanut oil or electricity, right? It wasn't until Ford said, okay, like, let's standardize this process, that things started to become more affordable and useful. And so that's what you and I have to do. You've come up with a process for this podcast, saying, I'm going to send out a Zoom link. I'm going to send out a Calendly link at this time, and then a Zoom link, and I'm going to ask these questions, and this is how it's going to be produced. That's the only way that it's sustainable. And the only way that it's actually enjoyable for someone to listen to is with a lot of thought and planning. And so I think that's maybe the tie between those two different systems. Would you agree?
Yeah. And well, it was leading me to another thought and question. What do you think has been the biggest difference for you, or how do you feel producing your own podcast on the side really primed you for helping this, marketing firm help them with their podcast? So the kind of things that you learn producing your own, that's helping you, again, help this marketing company produce their own.
I think one thing was having the opportunity to hear myself back and realize all the things I hate about the way that I communicate. You need to have that opportunity, and I think the more of us that can have that opportunity, the better communication we'll end up having.
My wife says the same thing. She she's had her podcast for a couple of years now, and there is a learning curve when you do a podcast, and she really beats herself up and gets mad because if she talks too fast, she says like and a lot, so she has a lot of filler sounds.
Sure.
And I said that's normal. I said, when you do a podcast, you're looking to slow down the thought process, so it's more of just a smooth transition from one sentence to another. And again, it takes time, it takes practice. And it's one of those things that evolves over time. But to your point, it's really important to go back and listen to what you've produced to see from an outside perspective. I call it the passenger side perspective, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
If I was the listener, how would the communication of this podcast come across to that person? and what can I
Right.
then in turn improve upon to make it even more clear?
Yes, yes. Yeah, that and just being extemporaneous, letting go a little bit. This has been a great experience, Scott, being able to be on the other side of this interview process. I feel like I learn a lot when I do this too. It's almost more helpful to be on the interviewee side to become a better interviewer. But yeah, all of that is helpful. I think in that initial podcast that we had, it was called Ideate, and it was we were just having fun. We're just goofing off, and so realizing that that's also important is to enjoy yourself. People can hear that, if you're and you're doing something for a specific reason, you have an agenda. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge with this, because our mandate for this podcast, Reach, has been to let's interview people that have had unique experiences and tie what made them successful to marketing, and specifically B2B marketing or ABM. And so that's been a challenge for me. Like, so we interviewed the guy from the original bobsled driver from Cool Runnings. Do you remember that movie from the 90s?
Oh yeah, I mean, John Candy was one of my favorite actors, so that was
Yes, yes.
great. Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme.
Feel
Yeah.
rhythm, feel the ride, exactly. So, interviewing someone like that, or a mountain climber, or an indie rock star, or and you're talking about the fitness industry, and now, like, how does this relate to marketing and B2B marketing specifically, to find those commonalities and those shared points without being canned or contrived or salesy about it. I learned a lot in that initial process, but just having fun and enjoying the process as you go.
Yeah. So as we start to wind down, Hiromi, if someone is looking to, well, listen to your podcast, where's the best place for them to go do that? But B, if someone wants to connect with you that, is wanting to learn more about you and how you're helping this marketing company and things that you focus on, what's the best way for the listeners to get in touch with you?
Oh, they could just Google me, Hiromi Matsumoto, if they want to learn about me. I'm not that interesting, but that you can cyber stalk me. That's fine. And then if you want to hear a great podcast, I suggest you go to reachabm.com, and in particular, you might be interested in the personalization in marketing, how Scott Aaron shows how being personable works out.
I remember that episode. It was pretty good. So
It was pretty good.
I would recommend listening to that episode too. Um,
Yes.
well, Hiromi, just really grateful to reconnect and just honored to have you on the show, and just so happy to hear all the things that you're working on, and the positive impact that you're having not only on the listeners of the podcast but also the company that you're working with now. Final question before we sign off: what does success truly mean to you?
Success truly means to me, it's a great question. Um, in the end, I think we won't know until our dying breath, and we look back, and we have no regrets. I think that's it for me.
I mean, it's a good way to summarize it. I remember something that my wife shared with me. Her grandmother passed away at a fairly early age of cancer. I think she was only in her early 60s. And Nancy went to go visit her before she passed, and she said, "Listen, Nancy, um, you know, live your life right now. Don't wait until something may happen. You're sick, whatever it is. Really live your life right now." And I think that's something, again, that I can correlate back to what you said. I think success is a feeling, and it's something. Yes, when we're on, our last days, we're in that twilight part of our life. We're going to look back and see all the things that we did accomplish. And that's why something that I do is every night before I go to bed, I write one victory that was accomplished from that day. And for me, it
Mhm.
allows me to see all the progress and all the great things that happen every single day. So,
Excellent
Hiromi,
advice.
Hiromi, thank you again so much for being here today. Just grateful for your connection and the opportunity to interview you, and just want to wish you continued success, and appreciate everything that you share with the audience today.
Thanks so much, Scott.
Absolutely. So everyone, as always, wherever you're listening to this to and from, please leave us a rating and review. It would mean the world to us. But also in that review, let us know what you love about these episodes, what you want to see more of, so we can continue to deliver the best content and the best value for you and your ears and all the things that come with listening to this podcast. So everyone, please enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much again for checking out today's episode. And if you are listening through iTunes, Spotify, wherever you are, please leave me a rating and review. Let me know what you loved, what you would like to see improved, or ideas you have for future episodes. And if you are interested in taking your business to the next level, don't hesitate to go to my website, www.scottaaron.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me, where I can learn more about you, your business, what you're struggling with, and how we can work together. And don't forget to check out my wife, Nancy, and mine, our free community on Facebook called LinkedIn Leads for Life. We would love to see you in there. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, everyone, for your support. Grateful for each and every one of you.